I'm Deborah Kodish. I was the founder of the Philadelphia Folklore Project, and I was honored to be a co-founder of the Folk Arts Cultural Treasures Charter School. And I'm Jewish. And when we found out that there is a breakfast happening here in the Kimmel by the Jewish Federation Real Estate Group, where developers David Edelman, Josh Harris, and others are basically selling their idea of an arena in Chinatown at 10th and Market, we just had to do something. I have the deepest respect for Asian Americans United. For years, they have fought to stop incursions onto Chinatown. More than 25% of the land has already been taken, and this kind of thing is a death knell for communities. Chinatown is the last remaining community of color in Center City, Philadelphia, and it has to stop. And it's just wrong, like for billionaires to be trying to direct the fate and erase communities of color.
We stand against the predatory development, against billionaires profiting by building schemes that destroy and displace beloved home places, against putting BIPOC communities at risk and turning valued cultural sites into, yet again, sacrifice zones. We stand for community-centered, community-driven, equitable development.
It's a violation of all that Jewish tradition stands for. When there's no attempt to learn about the community in Chinatown, to learn about the needs of its members, to find out the feelings of people in the neighborhood before forging ahead with a plan that could radically alter their living space, is, as this sign says, a shanda. It's shameful. When profits mean more than human beings, that's a violation of everything that Jewish tradition stands for.
And that is allyship, as demonstrated by Deborah Kodish, Marta Gutenberg, and Rabbi Linda Holtzman during a protest in the fall of 2022 against the proposed 76ers new arena. Before that, you heard a group of students at Folk Arts Cultural Treasures Charter School taking a West African drumming class.
Welcome back to part 2 of our third episode. We pick up the threads of our profiles on Ellen Somekawa and Reverend Roger Zepernick. Both have spent decades serving and advocating for immigrant communities in Philadelphia. It's no coincidence that Reverend Roger and Ellen have made their most important marks within the educational space. They share a deep, abiding love for building an equitable and prosperous future for the children and youth of immigrant families.
After Ellen became executive director of Asian Americans United in 1996, she helped make the organization a dominant voice of the Asian community on most every topic of public importance, defeating plans to build a baseball stadium and later a casino in Chinatown, growing several generations of Asian youth leaders, and transforming the annual Mid-Autumn Festival into a premier cultural event. They also backed Asian youths who were attacked in South Philadelphia High School in 2009 and helped monitor the district's subsequent civil rights settlement with the U.S. government. However, AAU's most enduring legacy may very well be the founding and establishment of the Folk Arts Cultural Treasure Charter School, or FACTS for short, in 2005.
We opened our doors in 2005. We started dreaming about it around 1999. The charter school was one of those charter schools that was founded through community activism, through the work of Asian Americans United and the Philadelphia Folklore Project. So it came out of this project of trying to improve public schools, and it ended up being the formation of a charter school. Asian Americans United has worked since the mid-1980s on trying to get public schools to do a good job serving Asian English learners and more generally immigrants and refugee students, to serve them well. And so there had been a lot of activist campaigns, advocacy, even litigation to try to get the schools to recognize the particular needs that English learners have, and also that particular needs that Asian American students have. AAU had done youth leadership things, had organized parents around schools. And at a certain point, we're just like, it's one thing to protest against something and to say, you need to do this thing better. But it's another thing to say, this is our dream and this is what we think school should look like. And this is what I want my child's school to look like, right? But at a certain point, I think two things happened. One is immigrant parents in our Chinatown Parents Association said to us just flat out, we are getting tired because we come after work, we work in garment shops all day long, we come to meetings, we fight around, getting services for our children in the schools. And then the principal changes, and then we have to start and do that whole thing over again. And then the superintendent of schools changes, and then we have to start that whole thing over. We're tired of fighting the same thing over and over. We need our own school. So they said that very clearly. And then I think on the part of the activists within Asian Americans United, there was also a sense of wanting to build something with more permanence, wanting something that we have some control over, and sharing that thing about not fighting the same fight over and over again. And recognizing that part of struggling for something better is to be able to show this is what we mean when we say this is the school that kids deserve.
On the continuum of what AAU started, opening a charter school expanded their platform of social justice work in ways that was a natural outgrowth of their existing youth leadership development programs.
So AAU used to do youth leadership programs, and we could serve 8 youth in a summer over 6 weeks. And then you have the charter school, which can serve 500 students over 10 months a year, over 9 years in their life. And so it's just this expanded way of doing some of those same activities of how do we invest in young people? How do we help them become the leaders that we need for our society to be a more just place? And so through building this public institution and just having a bigger capacity to engage more people over longer spans of time was part of creating the impact, as well as really wanting to be in part of an argument about what actually should public schools be and do. What is the purpose of schools? When we're educating kids, what are we going for? What are we trying to do? And so challenging that paradigm of what public education should be. And so we were very much about the idea of schools as being places that are not trying to teach kids out of being who their family and communities are. It's not like leave your cultural baggage at the door and become this other kind of person to succeed, but more like how do we invite all of who the kid is into the school? How do we bring in the knowledge of their families and parents and communities into the school and have that be part of learning, but also part of the learning being like, how do I contribute to my community?
And asking all these important big questions about what a school should be to a community as opposed to what it should not be, Ellen and the founders of FACT's charter school were able to infuse a vital component into the school's DNA right from the start: the arts.
So after Asian Americans United decided that we are going to try to open a charter school, becomes the question of what kind of school, right? And we decided that although our experience came out of Asian American community and out of pushing particularly around the rights of English learners and Asian American students, that we really thought that we wanted the school to be multiracial and multi-ethnic, and that we wanted it to be a mix of English learners and native speakers. Once we landed on that, then there's the question of, well, what is the thing that is the cohesion of this vision, right? That brings together the social justice part of what we're talking about, as well as the diversity of people. And so the idea of folk arts came up. We had been longtime partners with the Philadelphia Folklore Project on other kinds of community-based arts programming. They were supportive of us having artists in after-school programs. They supported us in strengthening our Chinatown Mid-Autumn Festival. So we had had a relationship with them prior. But I think the insight was that folk arts, right, really is the knowledge, wisdom, and traditions of your families and communities, and that no matter who you are, you have that, right? That everyone carries that. And so it became a way of building connection, right? That through honoring and respecting whatever somebody's bringing with them to the school could be a way of connecting people across their differences. We've been building it for 17 years, and now we've got some practices that we think are really exciting and strong practices.
After Reverend Roger moved to the Hunting Park area, he shared with us how he became one of the first founding board members of the Esperanza Academy Charter School, namely through being a parent of an attending student. Just a little background here. Esperanza is a faith-based nonprofit organization whose mission is to strengthen the Hispanic communities through education, economic development, and advocacy. Founded by Reverend Luis Cortez and the Hispanic clergy of Philadelphia in 1987, its portfolio of accomplishments is vast, and under its umbrella, it includes the opening of a middle school, a high school, and a college. All of these institutions, plus an art center, are housed on a robust city campus on the corner of North 5th Street and Hunting Park Avenue, just south of Olney.
When I was, a pastor in Spring Garden and getting another job, I worked for a while with a group called the Puerto Rican Alliance. And there was a Jesuit priest named David Ungerleider, Father Dave, very popular with people in North Philadelphia, not so popular with the diocese, who had spent most of his life in Mexico as a result of not being so popular with the diocese. But he organized a couple of nonprofits, and he organized one that he named Centro Pedro Claver, located at 7th and Venango, right on the other side, on the south side of Erie Avenue. And he got some funding for an administrator. He knew I needed a job, and he offered me that job. That was, I think, 1979. And I stayed there for basically 25 years in that position of being executive director of this community-based organization called Centro Pedro Claver. And I raised a family around the corner from our office at 7th and Venango. My daughter went to public school in the area. One of her teachers was Reverend Luis Cortez's wife, who Luis is the president of Esperanza. And then she had a chance in high school to go to Central, or we also did an application to Esperanza. It was the first year of Esperanza's high school. This was year 2000, I think. And she decided she wanted to go to Esperanza. Didn't want to deal with the travel, basically, to go to Central, even though it was a good school. So, I was a parent. They needed parents on the board of directors. They brought me in as a parent, but because Centro Claver had worked with Esperanza and other organizations on issues like housing counseling and bank redlining and various community issues, we had a relationship. They never kicked me off.
Similarly, because of relationships in the community, Reverend Roger was eventually invited to join ASPIRA's charter schools. ASPIRA, Inc. is a national organization that aims to advance opportunities for Hispanic peoples through education. The Philadelphia chapter was formed in 1969. In addition to after-school, summer, and early childhood programs, ASPIRA in Philadelphia opened up its first charter school in 1998. 2 other schools followed after that. Then, in 2010, the School District of Philadelphia awarded ASPIRA 2 additional schools to manage as charters: Stetson Middle School in Kensington and Olney High School under the Renaissance Schools Initiative. Olney High School, which was built in 1930, had seen its share of ups and downs over the last century. The student body evolved with the ever-changing neighborhood. Unfortunately, by the mid to late 2000s, the school hit hard times. It was operationally dysfunctional and the school culture was broken. The Renaissance Initiative was created to identify and transform chronically low-performing district schools like Olney High to dramatically improve student achievement. This would be done by leveraging additional resources and making changes in staffing and in school culture. Reverend Roger was brought on within the last few years to work on the boards of various ASPIRA-run schools, including Olney Charter High School. He describes how he became acquainted with the organization.
One of my best friends, who was active in the Puerto Rican issues, was a counselor at Olney High School back before it became a ASPIRA charter school. And he was also a member of the board of directors for the organization I worked for, Centro Pedro Claver. But Joaquin, as a counselor, would come in with stories about families, about kids being ignored in the high school, about violence in the hallways, about a teacher who would read a newspaper during class while not teaching, while the kids did whatever they wanted. And also about kids being told they were not college material, and he would get them their college applications and put it together. He died in a waiting room, in a hospital waiting room. It was big news because there was a video of people taking his watch off his body in the waiting room. Joaquin Rivera. And when he died, we got a call from a doctor in Virginia who was told he wasn't college material. We got a call from, we know the woman that runs APM, Nida Ruiz, was told that she wasn't college material. He got her into college, and now she runs this multi-million-dollar organization in Philly that has a positive impact on the city. I would constantly get people coming into my office at Central Clavier, begging for help to get their kids out of Olney High School. They didn't want their kids to go there. They knew the education provided was poor, and they knew it was dangerous. So I think that the important thing that ASPIRA did, by making connections to the community, they were able to deal with some of the violence problems. And I think that they brought in teachers that at least believe in the kids.
ASPIRA, as a charter manager, eventually ran afoul with the school district, which continued to maintain oversight efforts of the schools under its Renaissance umbrella. Accusations of financial impropriety and lack of academic improvement then led to their charters for Olney High School and Stetson not being renewed in 2017. ASPIRA lingered on as the school's manager, but after 6 years of court battles, the state-level Charter Appeals Board eventually voted in 2022 to uphold the district's decision to revoke the charters from ASPIRA and return control of the two schools back to the district. For the sake of editorial transparency, the producers of this podcast, Olney Culture Lab, have an existing working relationship with Olney High School and the School District of Philadelphia at this time. So any opinions expressed here only reflect those of our guests. While Reverend Roger's involvement in ASPIRA was fairly recent, he was asked to get involved only a few years ago, he expressed dismay at how it all played out. And given his allegiance to the community he served for so many years, he understands how such a decision can be deflating.
The school district said the scores didn't go up like they should have, and I'm not surprised by that. There's a lot more involved in what our kids are doing other than just test scores. But I remember going to a hearing to testify on behalf of the school because of that background with my friend who was a counselor. And one of the persons that I think was there or had written a letter perhaps owned a store on the corner. And he talked about how he used to close his store when the school would let out. But that after ASPIRA took over, that actually was his most productive time because the kids were good. They're coming in the store. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that, not so much in terms of charter schools, but the fact that it was a community-based school, community-based organization that made an emphasis on the safety and the cleanliness and the respect for culture and values of families in our neighborhood. Something that in this area the school district had not shown that they could do at that time. So I think it's a loss. I think the school district has made a mistake in going back. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the school district who want to see our kids do well and are concerned about attendance and safety and so on. Historically, for the community, there's not a sense of that. There are still people that I talk to who are taking their kids out of the high school because they know it's going back to the school district. Not because they know the people in the school district now and what they're going to do, but because there's a memory, a community memory of how bad things were for a long time in Olney High School. I think it was a mistake, especially even more than Olney, the Stetson School, where there was incredible loss. I do think it's a mistake that they took the school back.
Just as Ellen spoke about the importance of infusing the cultural practices of her students and their families into the day-to-day routines and pedagogy of the school's culture, Reverend Roger's sentiments echo those beliefs.
The community connections are just incredibly important for education, I think, but especially in a community that is not mainstream national culture. We have taken people in to meet with high school students. People have been, at Esperanza, we had a teacher who was a former political prisoner for her work in the underground in favor of Puerto Rican independence. And the kids, the impact on the kids is just incredible. Soft-spoken, quiet, but when she tells her story, it resonates and kids respond to it. We brought in a history professor from Chicago who is a leader in the independence movement in Puerto Rico. But when he talks about the history and the culture, he started out talking to the kids at Esperanza about music in the Caribbean. But by the time he was done, the kids were crying. They'd heard news and felt values that just touched them in a way that was incredibly helpful. So I think that to do that, you really need to have a strong community base. And I'm not confident that will happen again. Hopefully it will. But the city, you look at who's on the school board and who's involved in the leadership of the school district, and there's no confidence that they're going to know this community well. It's an interesting thing because you have a charter school movement, and then you have Esperanza and the ASPIRA schools, which are charter schools legally, but there's a community base. The security is community based. There's parents, there's neighbors that are dealing with the kids. The curriculum has little touches. In Esperanza, they used to have debates about the status of Puerto Rico, which is generally something that's ignored even in families. Historically, it's been too divisive. Somebody was asking kids about what they liked about being at Esperanza. I remember one girl saying, in this school, you don't get ostracized for speaking Spanish. In this school, you can hug people. In this school, there's a friendliness or something that she didn't know other places. All of that is, I think, it's just not a charter school, it's a community-based school. And the spirit's the same. I'm excited about what can be done. And I don't understand in a city that's dealing with youth violence, why there's not more of support politically for Olney and Stetson, which became much safer, much more attractive under ASPIRA leadership.
Ellen and Reverend Roger essentially operate from the same philosophical playbook. Fortunately for Ellen and FACT's charter school, they have the benefit of designing a school from scratch. When she talks about how impactful the school has been, it's a reflection of being able to build it from the ground up.
I mean, a lot of the way we look at impact is through the kind of young people that come out of the school, right? So we're a K-8 school. When students are 8th grade and they're reflecting on what they learned at our school, it is very gratifying when they talk about appreciating that they had a chance to learn something about who they are and that they had a chance to realize that they have a voice and that they got to experience different cultures and see the differences and to dive into understanding other people better. Part of it is just watching our young people operate in a small group with each other to see how they give feedback to each other, to see how they listen to each other. I mean, honestly, when I watch some of our young people in these groups, I think that their skills are a lot more advanced than many of the adults that I go to meetings with, right? In terms of creating space for people, noticing if somebody's left out, being supportive yet raising real questions of others. And so I think nurturing young people that kind of grow up with this idea of respecting others and understanding that their own understanding of who they are helps them to be better at understanding and working with other people. I think all those things demonstrate impact.
The fight to embed the lessons of culture that runs against the dominant mainstream is an urgent one, but one that AAU and FACTS have seen success.
We had a promotion ceremony where the 8th graders are leaving our school, and we had two of the speakers at this year's promotion were FACTS teachers who had been students at FACTS. And when they spoke about, getting choked up, when they spoke about what they wanted the young people to be learning. And then you could hear what impact our school had on them. Because that stuff is not just in the air of American society. And so that's when you begin to see, right, when they are then articulating to other people the vision of the school. And you're sitting there thinking, I couldn't have said it any better. And that, they picked it up through being students for 9 years or 4 years or however long they were at FACTS. So that's another way that we learn impact. And then it's a little bit of a sadness that our school only goes to 8th grade, but after 8th grade, many students participate in Asian Americans United's youth programs, which are geared towards high school students. So watching our students take part in their youth leadership programs, becoming staff people at Asian Americans United, and carrying on the Chinatown Mid-Autumn Festival. Young people are the main people. They're the heart of that festival. They're not just the labor of it. They're the planners of it. They're the people that make the festival happen. And then to watch our young people be part of that is also part of what shows the impact. Part of what we also talk to young people about, we all have choices to make about what's going to be our role in carrying forward aspects of culture that are meaningful to us, or standing by, or letting things fade away and die, right? And so just encouraging people to be really actively thinking about what role do I want to play? What do I want to help perpetuate this thing? Do I want to pass this on then to the next generation after me? And watching young people navigate all those questions is also a way we look at impact.
We were curious about how the fact staff and students were enduring our current climate of anti-Asian hate and violence, and Ellen expounded on it as only a student of history could.
At FACS, training teachers on histories of oppression against different groups, Asian Americans as well as other oppressed groups, is part of what we think is just an important basis of teacher education to start with. And then I'll say that incorporating the histories of Asian Americans and other oppressed groups in the core of our teaching is also important. And then also through participation in the folk arts, right? And making visible and showing pride and affirmation in arts, whether it's African drumming or Indonesian dance or Chinese shadow puppets, through making those art forms visible and appreciated, through making the histories with many diverse voices part of the histories that we teach, is part of helping students to better kind of place themselves in a situation in which people who look like them are attacked and randomly beaten on the streets, I guess, right? There's a way in which, giving some historical context to how oppression works, why, these attacks have happened on different communities over time, but also how different communities have resisted and stood up and created thriving communities in spite of it. Those kinds of lessons just have to be a part of the core of what you do every day in school. And really, when these incidents of violence happen, you can't just in a crisis response and all of a sudden think that you're going to address that crisis by a discussion right at that moment, right? That there's all of this grounding and preparation in the broader history of racism in America and how that functions, that helps people better kind of cope with the attacks when they do come.
All this brings us back to where we started with the 76ers arena fight and allyship. It's a topic which we had to ask Ellen and Reverend Roger about, as they've experienced it from many vantage points. Judging from what we've learned about Reverend Roger, we wondered how he viewed his role as a white ally serving communities of color.
We had some seminary students come to my church on Mount Vernon Street when the Young Lords were there. And one of the guys that came said that encouraged him to become a pastor finally. He was a really good pastor in Honey Park for a long time. But he said he remembers that somebody, they interviewed some of the Young Lords, and Young Lords, Juan Ramos, I think, who later became a city council person, said that I was teaching them the Bible and they were teaching me Marxism, which was fundamental to the... But they made me a member of the Young Lords. So the relationship, had that element of being accepted. But I think anytime you're a white person working in a community of color, there's also, especially in a role, professional role as a pastor, or even maybe a teacher or whatever, but especially as a pastor, there's always a question. You have to keep being reaffirmed that people want you there, that you're not just doing something they could do better. So, I tried to keep that ear open, because my idea was that I would work in the city for a few years and learn enough that it would benefit the work, where I saw the problem being really outside in the white power structure of the of communities that exist back in Ohio. I was going to go back to Ohio. But the invitation was there. There always seemed to be a problem to work on.
Reverend Roger goes on to elaborate on the delicate balance of working in a community of color while not being from there.
We had a young man that was put in jail who, for several people actually, at one time or another, were arrested in the neighborhood and incarcerated incorrectly. And you get involved in those kind of cases, and it's hard to step away in the relationships. So I stayed probably very selfishly in terms of wanting to keep the relationships, but I did have a sense of having to make sure that I wasn't bringing something in that was an imposition on people. Space is interesting. We opened some space for the Young Lords, and actually the Black Panthers also used my church as an office for a while. But we had a big wooden cross that my wife had made that we would hang up that was hung up in the church. But under it, we had a pool table. So during the week, kids would come in and play pool under that cross. And on weekends, sometimes on Saturdays, we'd have dances in the sanctuary. You won't be able to do that in most churches. But people were so desperate to get kids off the street, and we didn't have any other, space. We had 2 little classrooms. Our sanctuary was open to kids who would come in to do what they call socials. And so that, again, was relationship building with young people. But the relationships got built around that. And then, of course, doing funerals and weddings and so on. So it was kind of a tension between being an outsider and being a sense of being welcomed in the community at the same time.
For Ellen, allyship resonates in different ways. Besides finding common cause to fight alongside her Asian brothers and sisters in Chinatown and being part of that first generation of Asian American activists who forged alliances to gain greater visibility, there have been meaningful alliances with other groups at various times.
I guess the first thing to say is that everything about how the power structure of this society is set up is to, push against people being allies with each other, right? Like the whole setup is this division of groups against each other so that the rich can stay rich and that people can fight among each other. So not to state the obvious, a lot of the places where allyship comes up is during the course of campaigns when you're fighting a battle and you're either looking to others as allies or you're seeing that you should be stepping up as an ally to others. But all groups are navigating that difficult problem, right? That at the essence of what they're doing is they're building a strength and capacity of their group to do that work. Sometimes people come together, like in the fight against the casino. So I think that was maybe 2009, where they said they're going to build a casino a block away from Chinatown. There was sort of immediate outcry on the part of Chinatown. We said we were fighting this. Pretty quickly, we identified the issue as a struggle against the imposition of predatory gambling on a community, but quickly realizing that when they said that they're going to put a casino at the central hub of transportation in Philadelphia, that they were targeting all Philadelphians with this thing, right? So there was this in-your-face attack on Chinatown, and then there was this recognition that, no, they're trying to impoverish all Philadelphians by saying, yeah, we're making it so you can, before you get on the train to go for work, stop by the casino. They were very purposefully trying to target all Philadelphians with what they knew and what is central to their business plan is building addiction. And so looking at that situation, then we started to think about how do we build a united force against this thing, right? And so we approached the Black clergy of Philadelphia, and we had this long talk with the then leadership and really talked about how this thing is not just an attack on Chinatown. This thing is corrosive, and it's designed to take money out of poor people's pockets and send it away to some billionaires, casino owners and stuff. And so finding and identifying that core aspect of what really unites us and how this attack was coming down on so many communities, right? And then we built a really solid relationship with people in the disabilities rights community. broadening it to help more and more organizations and groups throughout the city recognize that this was far beyond a Chinatown struggle. And that coalition stuck together for years. I mean, it was not a short battle. And that was something where we really learned from each other, stood with each other, and was really strong. But I'll say that that is not this typical thing that happens all the time or easy to do, and that there's plenty of times when there's a struggle that's very, very contradictory, right?
Despite the successes of their partnerships in the fight against the casino, Asian-Black alliances haven't always been easy to maintain and are fraught with complexity depending on the situation being confronted.
There was a time in the late 80s that there were different boycotts popping up in different cities all over around what they call stop and goes. That's like the kind of sandwich shop that sells a lot of beer and stuff, right? So there was a shooting where a Korean shop owner shot and killed a young Black man, shot him in the back in Southwest Philly. And the district attorney immediately said this was a justified killing. And so Asian Americans United came together with a group, I think, called Community Awareness Network, an African American organization rooted in Mantua. And we were both saying, you can't make that decision without investigating. And from an Asian American point of view, we are saying, you are not favoring Asian Americans when you make an unjust decision like that. You are making us targets of anger, because that is not just in anybody's book, right? And so we ended up forming an alliance with that group. And then really trying to articulate what we meant was really challenging, because there were some groups that were organizing boycotts and picketing outside of the store and holding up really virulent anti-Asian picket signs and spewing hatred against all Asians. And believe me when I say it felt just dangerous to be an Asian in Philadelphia at that time. It just felt unsafe to be Asian because this had fired up so much anger. And so that was another instance in which it was, and then one of the groups that was portraying these racist anti-Asian things called us up and said, we understand you're supporting us. And we're like, no, we are not supporting you, but we are saying that this thing by the DA is unjust and we demand justice for this victim. But that is not the same as you boycotting and creating hatred against all Asians. So those politics are very difficult, right?
It has been humbling to learn about Ellen and Reverend Roger's work in the making of this episode, and to understand and be inspired by their dedication to fight oppression and strive for a better, more just city to live in. As Ellen mentioned earlier, Olney has been somewhat shielded from the type of gentrification that has impacted other parts of the city. But it is a neighborhood that is home to many vulnerable populations.
Can a community like Olney, who can boast about its cultural diversity on one hand, bring its residents together to address its collective challenges, even if those challenges are not as obvious or as ominous as the 76ers arena is to Chinatown? Of late, there are already signs that Olney is a recipient of the homeless being displaced by gentrification happening further south. Some Olney stakeholders have already come together to discuss how to compassionately deal with the situation while still looking after the interests of its residents and business owners. Ellen shared a powerful idea that we think comes with the wisdom of experience and a great call to action for us all.
It's a tough moment right now, right? To realize that really humanity might really be running out of time, and no joke, running out of time. And on the other hand, right, what is enlivening and what is kind of supports your soul, right, is when you get together with other people and work on things to make things better, whether it's building an institution or resisting a 76ers arena, right? That human activity of connection, finding common purpose, and working for a better future is the act of doing the hopeful thing is what has to give you hope, right? The external environment is telling us in all kinds of ways to give up hope. I think people are really mistaken if they view this kind of social justice work as some kind of altruism by standing up for my rights and for the rights of humanity. And I get to do it with people who I want to be with, right? I want to be together with people who share my values and share my vision. And when we do this work together, it's a privilege.
To join the No Arena in Chinatown campaign, visit apipennsylvania.org/Chinatown. That's apipennsylvania.org/Chinatown. Join us for our next episode as we feature an amazing example of caring residents and neighbors coming together, finding common purpose, and building a hopeful future, where sports and athletics are not a threat to a community, but a cherished asset that nurtures children and youth and forges bonds that feel like family. We will be featuring the Olney Eagles Youth Sports Organization. See you then.
Audio Olney is a production of Olney Culture Lab of Culture Trust, Greater Philadelphia, in collaboration with Amber Art and Design. Narration and deep thoughts were provided by Linda Fernandez and Keir Johnston. Music and sound design by June Lopez. Research and script writing by Ambrose Liu. And additional support provided by Varissa McMickens-Blair. Special thanks to PhillyCam for providing audio from the No Arena in Chinatown campaign. Funding for Audio Olney is provided by Independence Public Media Foundation, with additional support from William Penn Foundation and PICO.